part of this book has to do with our culture's sort of obsession with wealth and status. And I want you to talk maybe about two things to sort of get to your book. What about today's contemporary culture where everybody from, obviously Donald Trump, but even someone like Mitt Romney, where there's this sort of equating of wealth with virtue as if they're sort of the same quality. Obviously, it's taken to an extreme in Republican politics, but it's certainly something that, elites of all types and every political persuasion are sort of seem to be susceptible to. And then, use that sort of lens now to start to take us back to John Adams and why you sort of started thinking and writing about him. I don't think he's someone who would really come to mind when most people think about issues of oligarchy or inequality.
Yeah, as you said, the equation of wealth with virtue seems to be prevalent in our culture and in our politics. And John Adams, and I hope we can come back to this in a little more detail later, but John Adams was always very skeptical of the language of meritocracy because he thought that people would often use the language of merit to simply redescribe what were in fact privileges, and especially wealth. And as we could hopefully talk about in a little more detail as well, he thought that the admiration of wealth, the celebration of the rich, was really a source of the power of the rich. And he had a rich theoretical understanding of how that could be the case. An important thing to keep in mind about John Adams, speaking to your comment that he's not necessarily someone who comes to mind when we think about this, but an important thing to remember is that John Adams wasn't just a successful politician who also had some ideas about politics here and there. He really was a formidable intellect. I would even say a first-rate political philosopher, a social philosopher and a political philosopher. So when we think of great political and social thinkers in American history, people like John Rawls or Hannah Arendt or W.E.B. Du Bois or John Dewey,
Right.
I would say a number of the people we call founding fathers deserve to be studied in that kind of category as well. People like Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and above all, John Adams, because John Adams was someone who wrote a massive 3-volume work of political science called The Defense of the Constitutions of Government. This is a book that might be the most systematic attempt to understand politics and constitutions that's ever been written by an American. And it's a book that was described by a major historian in recent years as the finest fruit of the American Enlightenment, the finest fruit of that age of reason in the late 18th century. And even while he was sitting as vice president, I mean, you could joke around about how he didn't really have that much to do as vice president,
Right.
but while he was a sitting vice president, he wrote a series of essays called Discourses on Davila, which was his second major work of political thinking. And those essays drew on everything from Shakespeare to writers like Alexander Pope to the moral psychological side of Adam Smith's writings, and really had all kinds of subtle psychological reflections about political and social life. And maybe the most interesting of all are the various letters that he shared with people like Benjamin Rush, Thomas Jefferson, letters he wrote especially in retirement, where he explores all kinds of questions of social and economic inequality and the consequences of inequality for politics, which is something that we're so concerned with right now.
Absolutely.
Hey, it's Sam Seder. Why don't you subscribe to this channel? You can do so right over here. Over. Subscribe.